It sort of follows very naturally on Angela's presentation. We have her colleague from the Weather Channel, but to introduce Matthew, I would like to introduce Jana Hauser, who is soon to be associate professor in the geography department. She teaches meteorology, and the School of Journalism and WAEB and the geography department have been working on developing a new broadcast meteorology degree program here. And since we wanted to weave weather into this symposium, I wanted to invite Jana to come and be one of the introducers. So Jana, if you could join us.
All right. Thank you, Bob. I'm a little shorter. I have to adjust the mic here. So it's my pleasure to introduce your next speaker, Dr. Matthew, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your last name, Sitkowski, is that right? All right, great. One check mark off. Dr. Sitkowski earned a BS in meteorology from Florida State University, an MS in meteorology at the University of Hawaii, sounds like a great place, and a Ph.D. from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So currently, he is the executive weather producer for the Weather Channel, and in this capacity, he works with senior management, meteorologists, on-camera talent, and graphic designers to identify source material and coordinate the production of daily weather stories. Dr. Sitkowski is also a producer for Weather Geeks, which is a podcast that discusses weather and climate policy, communication failures and successes, and other topical issues of interest to the weather enterprise. Among his many accolades, Dr. Sitkowski has published several peer-reviewed journal articles in the American Meteorological Society journals. He also has worked for the National Hurricane Center in Miami and the Honolulu Forecast Office while going to school. And he has flown aboard the Hurricane Hunters. Particularly, he helped out with missions for Hurricane Rita in 2005 and Hurricane Irene in 2011. And just this year, Dr. Sitkowski was named a finalist for the 2019 National Weather Person of the Year Award. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Sitkowski.
So much. Hopefully the mic kicks in. I'm really excited. I want to thank everybody. This symposium has been absolutely fantastic. It's been a real pleasure. Everyone's been so professional. And this is the first time I've ever presented with a screen this big and this much space. So I'm going to take advantage of some real estate. I'm probably going to drive the lighting folks a little crazy. There they go. But yeah, no, it's great to be here. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm a scientist, so you're going to get a little different perspective today. The Weather Channel is an amazing place to work, very stimulating, a lot of different people, little different backgrounds. And I like to just start with my path. Just before my 10th birthday, growing up in Miami, Hurricane Andrew, this is the last Category 5 to strike the United States. We'll see the official report, as Andrew was saying, for Michael last year will come out from the Hurricane Center in April. That's very, very close. But it was right there in the eye wall, and a little connection here. The family we were with, the parents, were OU alum, and the Gaynor family, and actually Mr. Gaynor actually went on to become the CEO of Dairy Queen, so he kind of got a high-profile alum that was riding it out with us, and we were huddled listening to Brian Norcross, who was the meteorologist down in Miami at the NBC affiliate, and he was the only voice that was out there. Everybody else was knocked off the airways, and he really took us through Hurricane Andrew. This is what got me into meteorology. 5 years later, I had the Sitkowski Hurricane Center in the bedroom. I was watching the Weather Channel. I knew what I was going to do, which is a great thing. Going through college, knowing what you want to do, everything is geared towards that way. It's actually very, very helpful, and it's also kind of rare. You'll find that with meteorologists, usually from a young age, there's a story like this. And it was mentioned I got to work at the Hurricane Center out in Hawaii too, and got to go about, get some research data with the hurricane hunters. As fate would have it, my first day at the Weather Channel, I was signed up to help out with tropical season as a contractor, was exactly 20 years after Hurricane Andrew on August 24th. And my boss was Brian Norcross. That was him during Hurricane Andrew on the far left there. So you never know in life how things will circle back and come around. It also happened to be a big story. This is the cone. This is Tropical Storm Isaac. It was coming up to the Gulf Coast, so we sort of jumped in, thrown into the deep end. I had no television experience. I have very limited communication experience. I didn't even own any social media accounts. Didn't have a Facebook page, didn't have Twitter. And I'm 100% research scientist, but I'm absolutely loving every minute, right? It was just a wild, wild scene. So that contract position extended. Now I'm doing year-round stuff. I've been there since 2012, and I get to be sort of a utility player. I get to interact with the producers, with the senior management, the on-air folks. I really enjoy working with everybody live, long form. I get to help with the podcast, help with the live crew decisions. So it's just a very good, days go by quickly, and it's, like I said, it's a very stimulating place to work. So what I thought I'd do here is, there have absolutely been some big weather stories since I've been there, and I thought I'd pick a handful of them, and then touch on climate change as another little separate thing to talk about. And for all of these, sort of my role as a scientist at the Weather Channel, and then some of the lessons learned, since I know we have some students in the room, and of course it didn't take long. You see 2012's up there for me to do some lessons. So Superstorm Sandy, I imagine there's a few in the crowd that remember this one. Started in the Caribbean, came up, and we're kind of used to hurricanes kind of coming up and zipping off the coast, accelerating out to sea. And I guess at first thought that would be what Sandy would do and stay off the coast. Then the model started coming in and sort of boomeranging it right back into the East Coast. I remember the first model runs, and we're kind of like, that better not happen. That was like doomsday scenario. But sure enough, that's what did happen. And the storm sort of evolved into what we call like a hybrid system, almost like a part hurricane, part winter storm. Ended up becoming huge. It was the largest hurricane on record in terms of its wind field, of its tropical storm force wind field. And you can see here just how big all this orange is tropical storm. Sustained winds about 40 miles per hour or stronger. One thing I want to point out, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, but you see there's no hurricane warnings on the coast here. So the Hurricane Center, there's bureaucracies and there's things that are done and things have already been changed, but because they were forecast to not technically be a hurricane, they couldn't issue the hurricane warning, even though the impact would be the same. The winds are going to, 80 mile per hour winds and 80 mile per hour wind, but there's just some meteorology that sort of got in the way. But I'll talk about that some more in just a second. So as a scientist, my role is to help do the weather briefings and stick with the impacts and the timing, right? This is how things back up to do the planning. Landfall is going to be here, the winds are going to start here, and we can start to plan. This is when a hurricane watch is going to go up. That's what we think. The other thing, too, is, with weather, and especially with hurricanes, there goes this, hey, this is something you guys, keep an eye on, to you really need to monitor this closely, to now you need to be preparing for it, to hunker down, here it comes, right? And we have to do the language that we use, we have to, at some point, you have to get rid of the may, could, and just say, here it is, this is the forecast, this is what we need to plan for. Now we can start to use certain terminology. Now we can say catastrophic. This is what we expect. So monitoring the language on tone. During Sandy, I remember going up to Michael Lowry, one of our experts, and saying, it's time to slow down the language, add some dramatic pauses in there. It's a signal to the viewer that this is becoming a more serious threat. This is going to be a big deal. So you have to think about that. Also, the historical context. This was a record-breaking storm in so many ways. It was the first time the Hurricane Center ever had to use the word snow in a forecast. Snowshoe, Virginia, this was late October, got 3 feet of snow from Sandy. That hasn't happened from a named hurricane system. And the quick lessons here, you will make mistakes, and being prepared pays off. So there's a little thing called the National Weather Service chat, used for emergency managers and media and weather service offices to talk to each other. And this report comes across 3 feet of water on the New York Stock Exchange. This is during the storm. I see it. I run to Brian Norcross. I show him, and he looks on the screen real fast, and he goes with it, takes it to air. CNN runs with it. Other media outlets run with it. I didn't do my full due diligence, and it was, this report came from a broadcast media, so it became sort of the circular report. There was never actually 3 feet of water on the New York Stock Exchange. My lesson, we have a newsroom, a report like this comes across, give it to the newsroom, let them do their fact checking, verify, then we can report it on air. It's a quick lesson I learned that day. The other thing is being prepared pays off. We noticed this whole hurricane thing. You know, if it's not going to be a hurricane, it's going to actually, the name would have been Post-Tropical Storm Sandy, which does not sound threatening like a hurricane, right? So we said as soon as the Hurricane Center changes this to not being a hurricane anymore, we're going to immediately go to Superstorm Sandy. So we had a plan, we had the graphics, the language, everybody knew about this. So as soon as that happened, which actually happened right before landfall, we executed it, and that was good. It was good to have that plan in place. We already heard this earlier about television, and people come to watch with the weather. The National Weather Service did a service assessment report after Sandy, and they asked people, where did you get your information? TV. So there's a lot of different things. There's social media. There's different ways of watching things. When it matters most with weather, people still come to TV. It's a very, very important medium. And even with the cable cord cutting and viewership declining over the last several years, we just set a viewership record in 2017 with Hurricane Irma. So TV is still a huge thing when weather's a big deal. It's also a very important thing in saving lives. We don't have many days at the Weather Channel that are sort of equivalent to sitting in a newsroom and a bomb goes off somewhere. You know, it's usually, as Andrew was saying, there's sort of this buildup, you know. The sort of best equivalent of that will be when we have a big tornado on the ground. And I'm going to show you here, this is back in 2013. This is May. It's about maybe 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the afternoon. And Carl Parker goes up to do a hit. He probably plans to be up there for about 2.5 minutes or so. He's going to cover the storms that have just fired up. And he doesn't stay, he stays on his feet for over an hour. And I'll just go ahead and let it play, and you can see what it looks like for real breaking weather for us.
Trees and other debris, and as we look at the velocity signature, once again, an incredibly well-defined velocity signature that is now just west of 35. So the storm is getting ready to cross 35, and please, folks, now is the time to take shelter immediately. You do not have time to figure out whether or not this thing is going to be serious or not for your location. Now is the time to get into your safe shelter. You want to get underground if you can. With a storm like this, you definitely want to try to get underground, or if that's not an option, you want to get into the lowest, most interior part of your home and put as many walls between you and the outside as you possibly can. Extremely scary, dangerous situation now going on in Oklahoma City, very much reminiscent of what happened in 1999. Kim Kelly, back over to you.
Carl, we're getting word now that the police are trying to shut down parts of Interstate 35 and getting people.
So you can see Carl, calls to action, telling people what to do, how to stay safe. This is when we're truly a public service, the Weather Channel, in moments like this. The other thing is, I forgot, lost my train of thought there. We're doing this, and you see we'll take the local affiliate too, because they actually have the live picture of a tornado, and research has shown you have a tornado warning, you show a live tornado on air, people are far more likely to take cover, take the thing more serious than if you don't. So we show the tornadoes. It's known that helps. Unfortunately, this was a bad day. This turned out to be a pretty nasty tornado, and it went directly through Moore, Oklahoma. And I'm going to play this little clip for you. And this is now, we have just go ahead and went and took the Oklahoma affiliate coverage.
Damage path is right there on the top right of your screen. There's the school. I'm not for sure the exact name of it, but that's going to be on. It's going to be south of 4th Street. It's going to be east of Santa Fe. Whatever school that is, it's going to be. It is, like you see, completely destroyed as kids run up to hopefully their loved ones. But this whole area right here, guys, is it's completely destroyed. The houses are destroyed. They're completely leveled. We're gonna just stay right here in this area. This is the hardest hit area. Police have folks stopped right here on Santa Fe, in between 19th Street and 4th Street. This is by far the hardest hit area. As you can see, we've got more police out there trying to find everybody, or doing what they do best, is rendering aid. And all the kids are running. We'll stay here for a little bit and see if we get some damages, or if we get a report of how everybody's doing. I'm just going to talk to you as we kind of stay on this shot. As we continue to look back towards the west, this whole area is just completely demolished. Every house in this area is leveled. I'm fixing to cross. I'm just north of 149th Street, and this whole area right here, this neighborhood, in between Santa Fe and Western.
John, can you
police
hear
are
me?
driving through there looking for people. Yeah, I can hear you. Linda, can you hear me?
Yes, John, we need to let people know that they're going to set up a search and rescue headquarters at the Warren Theater. We saw your video from before where it showed the Warren Theater was in relatively good shape compared to many of those buildings around it. You're doing a terrific job of bringing home the misery that's happening right now. We need the prayers of everyone for more Oklahoma again. Now, you're telling me that this is video of parents reuniting with their children. I'm told that that's a school in the background. You can see police officers all around, but look at the ground on that shot previously before he pulled out. Go ahead, John.
Let me show you another school. It's right out my door, Travis, if you keep coming around. Perfect. Now straight down and to your left, right there. That's another school, Linda.
Oh my goodness.
And that one looks like, I don't know what to say. That one looks harder. It looks harder hit than any of them before.
Oh my goodness.
So that was really tough, because that was live, and sadly, school was in session. Students did take cover. People were doing the right thing, but this was a EF5 tornado, and we didn't have any fatalities at Briarwood, but unfortunately, 7 third graders died when a wall collapsed on them. And we don't often get these big tornadoes that go this long with this much scene of destruction, but our cities are growing, the bullseyes are getting larger. Unfortunately, these types of things are probably just, you just play the odds, are more likely to happen. So with these events, this tornado was May 20th. This one was just about 10 days later, also in Oklahoma. This was one of the most gnarly looking tornadoes I've ever seen on radar. It was the widest we've ever had, 2.6 miles wide. This is just west of Oklahoma City in El Reno. I was actually standing just off screen here, listening, feeding reports. It was a funky tornado the way it behaved, and we actually had some storm chasers, scientists that were hit. And this was the night that the Weather Channel actually had a vehicle hit. We had a reporter and crew that was hit and tossed about, a very serious accident. Ultimately, everyone was okay, but there's sort of a learning point here, too, where you're a reporter, you're a journalist, there's times when you become part of the story, even if you don't want to or plan on it. So as a scientist, on days like these, we sort of raise the flag, especially the morning of, when it comes to severe weather. We try and pinpoint as best we can the timing and location of where we're going to have the greatest risk. We'll also be alerting the control room. I'll be running with Angie. Angie, hey, we're going to get a tornado warning here, or it's about to enter the city. It's going to get updated. I'm doing radar analysis to help out the on-air folks, and we're monitoring the whole country. That day El Reno was going on, we're focusing on this is what's happening, but I had to go in the control room and say, hey, St. Louis, tornado warning's coming for St. Louis, it looks nasty, and we got to make sure we're covering that as well. And then, of course, there will be tough days. You have to try and set your emotions aside as best you can, and especially now with some of the political reporting, you can become part of the story, so you just always have to remember that. And it helps to be positive. We probably saved more lives than were lost with these tornado events back in 2013. And really, we haven't had a big, nasty, severe weather season since then, so hopefully that is still the case. So on to something a little bit more fun and exciting. Did everybody at least get up and look at the sky for last August of 2017? Show of hands. Was anybody in totality, 100%? Darkness. Anybody? Okay. Everybody pull out your pens and pencils and write down April 8th, 2024. That is our next total solar eclipse. I'm a meteorologist. I look at the sky for a living. The coolest thing I've ever seen is a total solar eclipse in totality. It's just absolutely phenomenal. You don't need anything special. You can just stand there and look at the sky. You can see the sun's corona, which is this white wispiness, which is actually hotter than the surface of the sun, which is counterintuitive. It's like being hotter next to a campfire than the actual fire itself. We don't know a lot about it. But this is my announcement. I learned about this in 2013, the 2017 eclipse in a presentation, so I'm doing the same thing for you guys. It goes through a lot of big cities, and it's going to be even longer, the length of totality, than the 2017. I think it would be really cool to be at Niagara Falls for this. But climatologically speaking, your cloud cover is going to be less in Texas than it would be up in the north. So there's your little hints for the planning for the 2024 eclipse. So this is probably, I think it's hands down, this was the most planned event in the history of the Weather Channel. And there's one reason why. We knew it was going to happen. We knew precisely when it was going to happen. So we had how many meetings, Angie, right? But what was neat about it, we went all in. We said we're going to do this, we're going to own it. And I was sort of the focal point, all the science, helping out with all the facts and making sure everybody's got this right. I talked to experts from across the country. We did Weather Geeks with this. And I was a cheerleader. I even with my family, I'm calling my mom saying, this is going to be like a national holiday. You just wait. This isn't just for, science geeks. This is going to be really cool. If you're passionate, it's easy. Maybe that's sort of overstating it. It's a lot of hard work, but it's easier to do, right? You can stay later if you're all passionate. You can work a little harder if you're passionate about something. Really cherish the special projects. I think the folks that did the wall, and we had our Cincinnati reporters, they probably just really cherish their hard work and their efforts and really proud of something. So when those things come around in your careers, really, really celebrate them. And then when you own something, you do it right, you feel good about it, you'll be proud, you're going to like it, even if it doesn't, hit some goals that corporate may want, even though we did good with the Eclipse. And when I mean we owned it. We had a reporter in a plane, in a car, and even on a boat covering the path of totality. There's our augmented reality. Stephanie had the reaction I had, which is actually had some tears, and it was a very emotional thing. So just, there you go. I think you guys got my excitement for what's going to be happening in 2024. This is an actual satellite image of what it looked like with the shadow of the moon coming across the country. And that you saw all the people in the field, all the planning that we did for this. This happened on a Monday afternoon of this week in August. And I just want to show you this. So as a meteorologist, I look at this and I go, ooh, late August, that doesn't look good. That's how our week started. That's how our week ended. So we had to pivot real fast, get everybody back to base, and you saw the video. Where you going next? Get back out there. So we're in Texas, Category 4 landfall Hurricane Harvey. Of course, we knew the landfall was not going to be the story with Harvey. It was going to be the rainfall. And what we didn't know is that we were just beginning what was going to be the 2017 hurricane season in earnest, right? 17 named storms, 10 of which became hurricanes, 6 of those what we call major or Category 3 or higher. What made 2017 really bad is that a lot of the hurricanes hit land, a lot of the islands, a lot of the United States too, and did so at really high intensities. Over 3,000 people died. Over $260 billion in damages. A record for rapid fire, 10 hurricanes in a row. And this is the first time we ever had 2 category hurricanes make landfall in the continental United States. And if you count Maria with Puerto Rico, that would have been 3. And it was also very close to being a Category 5 at landfall. So just a really nasty hurricane season. All right, this is what I'm really excited about. I'm going to be like you guys. NASA has a fantastic animation where they highlight sea salt, smoke, and dust in the atmosphere. This is the satellites looking at aerosols. And I'm going to play this out just to show you what the hurricane season looked like from their perspective. I'm going to come back here too and take a look at it. But the atmosphere is a fluid. This is why it's hard to get the weather right all the time. We have to study our fluid dynamics. We kind of live at the bottom of a fish tank, really, walking around with all this atmosphere above us. But here we are. This is mid-August. You can see the dust coming off Africa. And it's going to pick up Harvey here in just a second. And the reason why the sea salt is highlighted like that is the evaporation, the waves, the upward drafts, the wind is picked up, and some of the hurricane takes in the sea salt. And look at Harvey just hang out and hang out and hang out and hang out in Texas. And all that rainfall, it was actually a very well forecast event. And of course, as soon as that departs, we're already tracking Irma. And it's a disaster through the Caribbean. Jose, another big one. Irma, right up the spine of Florida. You actually had evacuations on both the east and the west coast. Jose was annoying. It stuck around for a long time. And it went up and sort of threatened the northeast. There's Maria. So we had multiple storms going on, and we just kind of kept on going this hurricane season. And that takes us into October. So it was a really busy year. Lots and lots and lots of weather briefings. We just constantly keep going with the forecast, right? And it's also really important, the extended forecast. I know we're covering this storm, but what about next week and next weekend and our staff who's working so hard right now? So we have to do all this planning. I'm also watching our air for the accuracy, make sure we're highlighting the right threats, right? Sometimes you want to highlight the storm surge the most, or it's the rainfall for the most, and we were doing that, for example, with Harvey. And also talking to the local weather service offices to better understand local impacts and get sort of their perspective on the local, the historical significance of the event. Is this a break the glass and push the red button kind of event? So there's certain times in your life, certain times in your career where you're going to have that kind of a story, that kind of a hurricane, and this was it with Harvey. The rainfall totals were even hard to believe that the models were putting out, and they all came to fruition. It was sort of like, that's the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario happened. So just sort of acknowledge that, have that conversation sometimes when you're doing your weather journalism. Hey, gang, take a step back. Is this really, where we think it is? Personal wellness is important. You heard Angie say it. It's kind of nice. The good news is the Weather Channel feeds you during these big events. I say the bad news is the Weather Channel feeds you during these big events. I put on my Sandy 6 back in 2012, I call it. And then I just personally have to balance, I'm a hurricane guy, my friends and family know it, and when a storm's threatening the United States, my phone just won't stop. And I finally just sort of sent everybody an email, said, hey, I'm having a conference call tonight at 8:30. And I just started doing that, and it worked out really nicely. People didn't bug me, but I still was able to answer a lot of their questions and help out the friends and family. All right, climate change. Oh boy, climate change is a tough one, right? And why is it so tough? Well, I'm not sure how it all got stuck together, but no matter what, you can't avoid it. Politics are just part of it. There's so much misinformation out there, and people get sources of information differently now, so it's really hard to get the right stuff out. There's a lot of doom and gloom, some of it warranted. It's really tough to get the signal out of the noise, so weather is very noisy, and then something happens, and well, was that because of climate change? How much of it was worse because of climate change? Very hard questions to answer. It's slow motion. It seems like it's far away, but it's not, and it's happening right now. There's some repetitiveness in the predictions, and what I mean by that is, there's sort of like the best guess of what the sea level rise will be in like 2100. And that's not updated every day. So every time we have a story about something and we have to show, well, this is the forecast, it's like the forecast isn't really changing. So it's just kind of like the same kind of information each time we do a segment. So we have to do things a little differently to get around that. And then there's small numbers but with big meaning, right? Oh, it's just 1 millimeter a year, but it's a tremendous amount of water, that kind of thing. And speaking of small numbers, This is just up the road. This is Columbus, Ohio. This is since 1970, the average spring temperature has gone up about 3.5 degrees. That's a big, big number for that short amount of a time. This is a projection for a number of 90-degree days centered on the period 2041 to 2070, and how much more 90-plus degree days the parts of the Midwest will see here. This is an emissions scenario that sort of project in the future if we start to curb some of the CO2 production, or if we made no changes and everything. So this is one of the sort of steady case. We don't really make adjustments. And this is compared to the 1971 to 2000 period. So I just did a quick look at what was the average number of days in that 30-year period from 1971. In Columbus, it was 16, and then the last 30 years, that number was 19. So some of these things, again, it's not climate change, it isn't just the future. Climate change is happening now. Sea ice up in the North Pole. If we had millions of people that lived up in the Arctic, we would have a very different climate change policy. That's where the planet is warming the fastest, and the most dramatic visible changes are happening right now. You can see I tell people, it's the extent and the volume. So it's the book is decreasing, and the number of pages in the book is decreasing, right? The ice is melting. There's a lot of what we call first-year ice right now that will just form in the winter and then melt in the summer. And it doesn't hang around that much longer anymore. As a result of glaciers melting and warmer ocean temperatures, due to something we call thermal expansion, the oceans are rising. It's just a steady background tick, tick, tick that's just happening. And a lot of this sea level rise is already sort of locked in place, even if we did curb some of our emissions. And it has real impacts. This is a little complicated, a little messy. I'm going to take you through it. This is a chart from my friend Brian McNulty down at University of Miami. This is back in 1996, and we're going to 2020. All of this noise here is just the tides, thousands of tide cycles in here. And then he sort of smoothes this out with this 3-month average. And all high tides are not equal throughout the year. There's actually some high tides are higher depending on where we are in the course of the year. In the east coast of the United States, usually the fall is when we have our highest high tides, and we call those our king tides. And you'll notice here, this is Miami, so we had some hurricanes in the area, and steady wind blowing onshore, pushing all that water up, and we had these high levels of water. This was Irma, really high one. And then look at this. This is the king tides. This is sunny weather flooding in Miami. And this is beaches overwashed with water. This is streets overwashed with water. And it doesn't take much. You could have a light onshore breeze, and you're going to have this flooding. It doesn't really take a big storm anymore. So when covering climate change, I find it useful to use analogies. Was that storm part of climate change? It can be tough. It's a little bit like trying to figure out, was Barry Bonds' 450th home run because of steroids? It's hard to answer questions like that. Make it personable and tell a story. So I'll tell you one real quick. I purchased a home in 2014. It was the first one, exciting. Maybe a year later or so, I go into the kitchen. I look up, and there's this little water stain in the ceiling. Could have been there when I bought the house. It's kind of faded, but I was like, darn it, that's annoying. But I go on. Months go by, go back in the kitchen, and I look up, and I go, oh yeah, there's that water stain. I go, I wonder if it got any bigger. I have no idea. So I took a picture of it. Months and months and months go by. I come back, and I go, did it get any bigger? I can't tell. So I take another photo, I overlay it, and oh yeah, it's a little bit bigger. I have an active leak. And right above that ceiling is the bathroom. But I know with leaks and pipes and things, it doesn't have to be right where it is. And I said, well, all right, I'll deal with this later. And then we have the rainiest day since I've been in the house. It just rained and rained and rained and rained and rained. And I got a step stool, and I went up, and I touched the ceiling, and it was cold and damp. And I said, how about that? I've got a little leak in the ceiling of the roof. And I said, my gosh, this is just like climate change. I said, it took a storm for me to realize it. I'm too busy doing other stuff, right? There's, relatives are coming over, there's holidays and birthday parties, and I can get away, I don't have to deal with this right now. But one day, if you don't take care of it, you'll be in the kitchen, and the ceiling will cave in, and of course, it's too late, right? So talk about health, safety, insurance, what it means to the people, how's it going to hit their wallet, what does it mean for their family and their children. You don't need to keep hammering the worst case scenario. Mother Nature has been kind enough that we don't need to do the worst case scenario. It's going to be bad enough for a lot of people, even if it's sort of an average of what we think. Offer hope. We will adjust. We will adapt. It will all be okay, I'm sure, hopefully. Good visualizations help, of course. And I always like to use real observations. This is what's happening now. This is the observations. And this is how it's going to go into the future, right? So don't always just make it the forecast. This is what you guys have already seen the past 20 years. Here's what the next 20 years, and then the 20 years after that. And as Andrew was saying, you don't need to have, and now your climate segment. In fact, you don't even have to use climate change, the term. We like to have what we call our climate veggies. We just sort of sneak them in, a weather hit. And it goes something like this. It looks like it's going to be a hot weekend for you folks in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, triple-digit temperatures. Philadelphia, 99 degrees, just shy of 100. And by the way, does it feel like it's been getting hotter lately? Take a look at this. You guys average about 6 days a year where you get to 95 or higher. And some of our climate models project, that you'll be getting 23 by 2060 and potentially close to 50 days a year by 2100. Now let's go take a look at the other forecast. You just kind of just get it in there. But we also like to do, obviously you can still have, legit climate reporting, and we like to do a little segment we call Examination Earth, a little monthly report, a little report card, a little checkup, if you will, and sort of note where we are globally with the results, and like the third warmest June, or this was the warmest year on record, that kind of reporting. I talked about good visualizations. This is a sort of a worst case scenario depending on the time of year. This is Charleston, South Carolina. This is 8 feet if the sea level were to rise 8 feet, which if we just pick 2100 as the year, this would be a real extreme case. It's unlikely. I don't know when 8 feet would be likely, if it was 2150 or 2200, something like that. But these types of visualizations really help showcase the threat. And this is not a high tide. This is just where water is, permanently. So you can't live here in its current state. Charleston will be dramatically different, once the water does start to come up. And sea levels have risen about a foot or so the past 100 years, and that rate is probably going to just accelerate as we get later into the century. Pretty amazing. It's also not. There's the global sea level rise, and then it's different for different bays and different cities. Sea level globally may rise 2 feet, but at Charleston that might mean 5 feet, something like that. It's not just a uniform rising. And then I'll just go ahead and finish. I said to offer hope. The Yale program on climate change communication, a fantastic program, and they've been keeping results of the same questions year after year. And this is the 2018 results. They surveyed across the country. Do you think global warming is happening to the adults? And 70% of the country says yes. And if you break it down by county, you can see. You can see where the universities are. There's Madison here. That's where Wisconsin is. But there's really, you break it down. This 70% is not being dominated by huge numbers, right? There's a lot of plus 50% or higher for a lot of these counties. And perhaps more encouraging, when asked if this is something we should be teaching about, the causes, the consequences, and even potential solutions, it's even higher. So the numbers are going the right way. Mother Nature the last few years has sort of been helping the cause to get to raise awareness, unfortunately. And this is something that, it's not even we always kind of joke, it's like having a discussion on whether or not gravity exists, right? I mean, this is happening. It's part of weather, and it will probably just get worse as we get into the future. The good news is that it's a slow motion thing, and we have had big challenges in the past. We've risen to the occasion, and I have no doubt that at some point we'll get super aggressive on this in the cities that need it most first. So that is all I have. Thank you.
In reporting weather emergencies or difficult times ahead, how do you avoid the cry wolf syndrome? That you've cried wolf and things didn't happen, not as bad as you thought they might happen, and so on. Do you have a technique now how you kind of sneak up on the viewer and to accelerate when you think you're 100% sure? Or
Well, luckily, I don't have to worry about that. Just kidding. No, we of course have situations in storms where the forecast is a bust. Usually, it works the other way, where we're not forecasting something and something happens, rather than forecasting some big event that doesn't happen. The toughest things to do are the high-impact, low-chance events, right? And explaining the uncertainty to the viewer. So what we like to try, and I have another colleague, we say, if you always present it correctly, you'll never be wrong. You obviously have to say, here's what we think's happening, and this is a scenario that this could happen. This is the most likely scenario, and this is the least likely scenario, something like that. But you also have to give a bottom line. You have to give the forecast. You have to say, this is my best guess. And this is what we're going with. Stay tuned. That will change. That will evolve. But I showed you that the smoke and dust and everything, and it's really the atmosphere is a fluid. It's a very difficult thing, and quite honestly, it's amazing meteorology as good as it is. And if you look at predictive sciences, meteorology's had hands down more success than other fields. We've really come a long, long way. We're kind of spoiled now, which is a good thing. Yeah.
So we had several presentations today earlier, which you were here for. They weren't necessarily about climate change or about weather, but they were, in many cases, weather was a part of that story. We talked about that. Maybe you could say some words about that, and then I want to follow up with the second point.
Yeah, I had a seventh grade teacher. We were doing weather, and she was asking, "Hey, what does weather affect and do?" And kids start raising their hand, and it affects food. And she's like, "Yeah, what else? What else? Oh, it affects the clothes you wear." And she's like, "Yeah, but what else? What else?" And no one was really saying it. She finally just goes, "Weather affects everything. How you look, how you feel, what you do, where you go, what's closed, what's open." She's like, weather is part of everything. And then we had this, like you were saying, the talks today. The wildfire, we talked about red flag warnings, drought conditions, winds. Then we were looking at, mud in the rice fields, and we talked, and Tanya was talking about the heat when these refugees were moving through. We saw the snow in the plains and those black and white photographs, which were beautiful, and we talked about the monsoon, right? So weather was part of all of those stories. It wasn't the star, but you can't, this is what we live in. We live in the weather, so it's a part of everything we do. And in fact, the National Weather Service, if you follow it through the federal government, where it backs up to, anybody know what cabinet level, who oversees ultimately the National Weather Service? Any guesses? Good job. Department of Commerce, which you kind of like, huh? Commerce Department. 30% of our GDP is directly impacted to the weather. Big number. So
my follow-up, it's not actually directly connected to that, but I recently was in a position to judge journalism contest, and one of the winning entries was about it focused on three young people, basically children, in one of the island nations, and they're thinking about their future because it's very clear that their nation will be underwater, and how does that affect them as a young person? but that's an international story. And I wonder, with the Weather Channel, I know it's a domestic focus, but some of the most severe, and you could even call them, canary in the coal mine stories, are going to be offshore. What just happened on the coast of Africa and other places. So I wonder if the Weather Channel has the capacity, to do those kind of stories, because I do think they do have a lot of impact on us, how we see our future.
Yeah. Angie mentioned our domestic focus. Something like our Examination Earth series that I talked about is a point where we would actually talk more internationally. We actually covered, I don't know if you folks remember in 2013, Super Typhoon Haiyan that hit the Philippines. We actually sent Brian Norcross there for that. So, the bar is high to cover those events, even more so when we bring it in with climate. But, going forward, who knows what climate coverage will look like at the Weather Channel, and there could be long-form shows that get into stuff like that, a special series, or teaming up with other organizations. I think this is just me, just Matt taking a guess at this, but I think you sort of need to. We're good at reacting when things hit you in the face, right? Climate change doesn't do that. But what I think the first thing that's going to really make a difference is going to be in Florida. At some point, the insurance companies are just going to say, why are we insuring these homes? And why are they getting flooded, twice a year or something like that? And I don't know if that's going to be in 2030 or 2040 or 2050 or something. But I think when that starts to happen, hits the wallet of people, then dominoes start to fall and things start to happen, and maybe coverages increase too.
So I have I have a two-part question. One is about the animation you showed. This is obviously data-driven, but one question is, of course, which data do you use? For instance, I noticed that there was very little smoke coming from China, when China is, to my knowledge at least, one of the places where a lot of smoke is being produced partly just by wild coal fires and things like that. So I was wondering how complete a data set you would use for creating an animation like that, which, by the way, I really love, but it raised that question. So that's the first part. And the second part is about, when talking about climate change in particular, to people that are declared skeptics and are not skeptics based on knowledge, but skeptics based on prejudice, how do you address that? How do you deal with that?
Okay. So that one animation that I showed, that was a NASA animation. So we didn't have anything to do with making that. And I think it was just, I go back, but I think it was just centered more on the Atlantic basin. I don't think we got the whole globe. But you're absolutely right that other countries, especially those that are developing more, are bigger pollutants, and China's certainly up there. That Yale Communicating Climate Change program has a sort of a breakdown into categories of where people fall. And I think it's around 7% or so that fall in that category, that no matter what you say, it's sort of, you're just hitting your head against the wall, and it's just, and I think the advice from them is just forget it. It's 7%, and it's sort of wasted energy.
What do you do when your leaders are part of that 7% group?
What's that? When I'm talking to one of them?
What do you do when your leaders are part of that 7% group?
Yeah, don't vote for them. But I think that, but to some extent, I mean, it is true. There's a certain amount of the population that with something like that, that's just it's unfortunate, but it's you can get angry about it, and I have, and colleagues have in the past. But the good news is there's a much larger percent that is wants to get more informed. So that's your target audience, right? Those are the people you want to work with, and I like to bring them along, like this. I like to change people's frame of reference too. A lot of times people are like us and nature, and I'm like, nope, we're part of the food chain. We're just at the top of it. We're a beaver can cut down a tree and ruin a golf course, and that's a story. And I'm like, well, we can clear out a forest and put up a parking lot. I mean, that's like the same thing, right? We just have this, like, we're not connected with nature. We know about these things called urban heat islands in cities that are much, much warmer than the surrounding area by several degrees. And it's because humans came in and changed the landscape. And it's not climate change, and it's not a mystery. We know why this happens. So, like, humans can alter the weather locally. So when we have, billions on the planet, we can alter the planet's local weather too.
I had a question back here. I was wondering, so we were looking at the map, and it showed about 70% of the people, kind of know about climate change. But, that's only the first step. We have to kind of do something about that. We can all know that it's happening. So I was just going to ask you as a scientist, what's the kind of things that we can do day to day to kind of combat climate change?
Good question. Good question. Well, I think all of the sort of the energy, the checklist with the checking the light bulbs. You use energy efficient products as much as possible, and I adjust your thermostat during the day. Sort of all of those little energy savings things that you can do. The next thing that's becoming slowly cheaper is solar, like personal solar panels on houses and everything. I think IKEA is actually going to start selling solar panels here in the future. So those personal things, and then just being a good steward of the environment, recycling where you can, and informing your friends and relatives. I have to do that about what's happening. And then I just be conscientious too about whatever your sort of global footprint is, carpooling. And sometimes it feels like you're just one person, but it does all add up.
Last question right here, Rich.
I just want to know if you have an easy way of thinking when you are presenting the differences in levels of hurricanes. I know that some people think, oh, well, Category 5 is just a little bit bigger than a Category 4, or if there's an exponential thing there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. The question is, we have what's called the Saffir-Simpson scale, the category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of a hurricane. How do you communicate, going from one to the other, and how people interpret that change? First of all, it's 100% dictated by the wind. So it's only wind, and it's binned by those categories. Now, as you go up in the category, the damage potential is exponential, right? So a Category 5 is not twice as bad as a Category 2. It's far more the damage potential, and our deadliest and most expensive hurricanes are usually the 3, 4s, and 5s. We like to try and talk most about the threats, right? So we've had tropical storms that have been, killed people. Tropical Storm Allison back in 2001 went over Houston. Its name got retired from the Hurricane Center because it was such a flooding disaster, right? So we try and break it down into rainfall, storm surge, and wind for those threats, and then tornadoes usually on the fringe. We try not to focus too much on that category, and if we have a reason to specifically say, this is just a Category 1, forget it. This is really going to be a big storm surge event for you guys in Louisiana that happened with Isaac. Don't focus on the category. We'll say that. And then just the other thing that's happened too is the cone that you see on air that the Hurricane Center uses. That doesn't take any that's a fixed cone every year. So it doesn't take any new information for what's happening at the time, right? And it's based on forecast errors. And over the past several years, the forecasts have been better. The cone's actually skinnier. If Katrina happened today, its cone would be much smaller than it was in 2005. But it's actually created a new problem. The hurricane's actually too big for the cone now. So a lot of people are like, oh, I'm out of the cone. Whew, I don't have to worry anymore. It's like, no, it's still really bad. You still have to pay attention. So we fight those two battles every hurricane season. Don't pay too much attention to that cone, and the category, let's talk about it, on air. Let's have a conversation about that category on air.
Last question, Rich.
Oh yeah, on the NASA map, you could see like a lot of dust coming from Africa, and we know that the desert is getting much bigger in Africa, and does that have any effect on climate and generating those hurricanes?
Yeah. We call that the SAL, my buddy Sal. It's the Saharan air layer. And we'll get those big dust outbreaks that you'll see there. And a lot of that is very dry air when it comes off of Africa. And that's not good for a hurricane. So a lot of times a hurricane will have to fight against the dust. It takes longer for a storm to develop. The dust ultimately mixes out or settles into the ocean. But it goes all the way across to Texas during the hurricane season. You can track it sometimes a year, and you'll see sunset photos, spectacular sunset photos out of Miami or Houston or something with those dust, particulates that are in the air. So it's absolutely a player in terms of forecasting.
All right, we want to wrap this session up, but go straight into the panel discussion. So while we've got you folks here, I'd like to have all of